A beloved California couple executed in a shocking daylight attack inside their more than $1 million home. Dr. Eric Cordes, a respected radiologist, and his wife Vicki, a beloved spin instructor, gunned down in the garage of their quiet home in Simi Valley. And police say it was a targeted hit, perhaps even by someone the pair knew. The hunt for the shooter led them 70 miles away to a grim discovery, a burned out car in Chino.
We were able to determine through law enforcement databases that that vehicle was actually in fact linked to our double homicide here in Simi Valley.
Who could have done this? Now investigators say they have the answer, and the truth is more devastating than anyone imagined. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. Hey, before we get into this episode of On the Case, I want to talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest personal injury law firm, a firm with more than 1,000 attorneys who have recovered $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. In the past few months alone, a client in Florida received $12 million when insurance offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, another client was awarded $26 million, 40 times the insurer's offer. Morgan & Morgan makes it easy to fight for what you deserve. You can even start a claim from your phone. So if you're injured, you can start a claim at forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also click the link below or scan the QR code on your screen. We are tracking a shocking and tragic case out of Southern California that has left a quiet community reeling. Investigators are chasing a mystery that stretches across 2 counties. All of this started on Sunday, December 1st around noon in a peaceful Simi Valley neighborhood on a cul-de-sac called Hawksbill Place. A husband and wife were in the garage of their $1.3 million home when police say they were ambushed. A neighbor pulling into his own driveway saw something that was terribly wrong and called 911. First responders arrived to find a horrific scene. The couple, both in their 60s, had been shot multiple times. They were rushed to a local hospital, but their injuries were too severe. At a news conference on Monday, December 1st, Sergeant Rick Morton of the Simi Valley Police Department gave the devastating update.
A male and a female down within the garage. They were subsequently transported to a local hospital and unfortunately later succumbed to their injuries.
In those first hours, this case was a total mystery. A double homicide with no named suspect and no clear motive, but as the investigation unfolded over the next day, a clearer, more tragic picture emerged. The victims were identified as 63-year-old Dr. Eric Cordes, a highly respected radiologist who, according to a statement from Adventist Health Simi Valley, he had served that community for nearly 3 decades. His wife, 66-year-old Vicki Schiller, was a beloved local spin instructor who, according to friends, had recently become a grandma. Friends and neighbors described them as the kindest people, the heart of their community, but now they were gone. Immediately, the hunt for the shooter was on. Witnesses reported seeing a car, an older model black Honda Civic, speeding away from the scene. The search for that car led investigators on a trail 70 miles long. Just a few hours later, around 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, police in the city of Chino, California, responded to reports of a car fire at a park. A vehicle was completely engulfed in flames. Once the fire was out, a grim discovery was inside. Sergeant Morton described what they found.
The black older model Honda Civic was reported possibly being down in the city of Chino. We sent some investigators down to that location. The vehicle was fully engulfed, and the subject that was found near the vehicle was also burned.
Simi Valley detectives tracking that missing Honda ran the information from the burned vehicle, and they got a critical match.
Through law enforcement databases that that vehicle was actually in fact linked to our double homicide here in Simi Valley.
The burned car in Chino was the same one seen fleeing the murder scene. A handgun was also recovered near the Chino scene, but this created a massive hurdle for the investigation. The condition of the scene made identifying the person found there incredibly difficult. As Sergeant Morton explained, it's the key reason that they haven't named a suspect.
But we're unable to substantiate who that suspect is due to the condition of the subject that was located in Chino.
You've heard the speculation that it's a stepson.
We've heard speculation. We have not put out any information as far as who the subject is. We don't want to misidentify someone, so we're waiting until we get confirmation from the medical examiner to see who that was in that vehicle.
At the time of that press conference, investigators were still awaiting formal identification from the San Bernardino County Medical Examiner. From the very beginning, however, police had been clear about one crucial fact in this case, and that this was not a random act of violence.
Is there any indication at this point that the suspect knew the victims?
Yeah, we do believe the victims were targeted. We don't believe they were random victims.
And that fact leads directly to the central haunting question of this case. If Dr. Cordes and Vicki Schiller were targeted, who would want them dead? Neighbors at the scene told reporters that they saw a man at the home who they believed was the couple's stepson. And while early on, police would not confirm that identity publicly, there was speculation that had taken on new weight. After the murders, a friend of Vicki Schiller posted a photo of her, and it was as a tribute to her. But then you looked in the comments section underneath that public post, and multiple people, seemingly friends and locals, they started pointing fingers directly. The comments, which we have seen, included statements like, quote, "It was Eric's estranged son who shot them," and quote, "They think it's the stepson." Now, at the time, none of this had been confirmed, but that's changed. Investigators are finally providing the answer to that question, a question that has gripped this community. In a new update released December 2nd, the Simi Valley Police Department confirmed that the shooter was the couple's own family member, 37-year-old Keith Cordes, Dr. Eric Cordes' son, and he was from Kentucky. According to police, Keith Cordes traveled to California, cross country, shot his dad and his stepmom inside their garage, then fled the scene in the black Honda Civic. Died from a self-inflicted injury after lighting the car on fire in that park in Chino. The San Bernardino County coroner confirmed his identity. Investigators say that they believe the firearm they recovered at the scene is the same one that was used in the murders of Eric and Vicki. Additional forensic testing is underway, but detectives say all evidence now points to him as the sole suspect. For many in Simi Valley, the confirmation, it's heartbreaking, but it also closes the circle on a mystery that began with whispers, speculation, and fear that a killer was on the loose. Now police say there's no ongoing threat to the community. But to understand the profound loss in this community, we need to talk about who Dr. Eric Cordes and Vicki Schiller were. They weren't just victims. They were pillars. Eric Cordes was more than a doctor. He was a cornerstone of local healthcare. For nearly 30 years, he served as a board-certified radiologist at Adventist Health Simi Valley. His passing sent shockwaves through the hospital. The administration released a heartfelt statement which read in part, quote, "The Adventist Health Simi Valley community is heartbroken by the tragic deaths of our longtime colleague, Dr. Eric Cordes and his wife, Vicki. Dr. Cordes was a highly respected, board-certified radiologist and beloved physician who served this community with compassion and excellence for nearly 30 years. Our hearts are with his family, friends, and all who had the privilege of working alongside him as we grieve this shocking loss." He also worked with Focus Medical Imaging, and that group released a statement saying, quote, "Dr. Eric Cordes was a brilliant, hardworking doctor and respected colleague. He will surely be missed." And then there was Vicki. Vicki Schiller was the vibrant, welcoming face of fitness for many in her community. She was a beloved spin instructor. She was known for her energy and for mentoring others. A close friend posted a tribute online that really captured her spirit in writing, saying, "We are in numb shock that our friend is gone. Earlier this year, we were in Simi and took over her Thursday morning spin class, which was my old class. We took this pick and she let me teach it. Vicki and her husband, Eric, were senselessly shot in their driveway yesterday. Our hearts are beyond broken." She had recently become a grandma. Friends describe a couple deeply in love and fully engaged in life. They were the friendly faces on that cul-de-sac where they were found dead, the respected professional and the inspiring coach. Their sudden, violent absence has left a void that words from institutions and friends alike are struggling to fill. Joining us now to talk more about this investigation is homicide investigator Chris McDonough. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on Law and Crime. It seemed like pretty quick that investigators in this case said that this looked like a targeted attack. How do you typically know that something's a targeted attack as opposed to random?
You know, that is a really great question, Chris, because typically when you have a husband and wife in their garage who have been slain like this, you know, your initial impression driving to these types of crimes is this domestic, you know, and one of the other, you know, killed each other, right? So you really rely upon the patrol guys when you first get there on the scene, and you do what you call a circle up, where everybody gets, together we discuss, what kind of information and what type of witnesses they may already have. And I'm assuming that's probably what happened right here. They had some neighbors and stuff like that come out and say, hey, we saw a particular type of shooter.
So when you get a call like this, and any crime in any community is a big deal, but it doesn't seem like in this cul-de-sac neighborhood that a double homicide is something that is a regular occurrence. What are some of the things that are going through your mind? You get this call that this has happened. Some of the first things you're looking for, in this case, arriving at a garage where you have this husband and wife who were dead.
Well, one of the first things you want to do is start thinking about who the circle of influence could be in relationship to this particular family, the husband and the wife. And from there, you want to start thinking about what we call pattern of life. Who were their influences, who's around them. And you do that through what you call a victim risk continuum, meaning just think of an L-shaped continuum, right? On this side, it says environment, situation, circumstance. At the bottom, it says low, medium, high risk. And if everything in the environment, situation, circumstance tells you it's a low type of placement on that victim risk continuum, then there's a higher probability that it was a targeted attack. And in this particular case, that's would have been one of the standard things that you would start with.
And according to police, Dr. Eric Cordes, it's his son who has now died, that was believed to be the suspect in this. And it doesn't appear that we really know much of a motive. There was some rumor that they had an estranged relationship. He lived in Kentucky. But I still think of arriving on that scene, and even if there are the signs that would tell you that it's believed that this was probably a targeted attack, I mean, how much time do you have to make that determination? Because then at the same time, there's still, even if it's a small possibility, still a possibility that it could be a random attack, and then you could have a public really concerned about someone who would be on the loose.
Yeah, well, that's a great question as well. So you typically have within the first 3 hours, to kind of make that call, right? And fortunately in this particular case, unfortunately in this particular case, within 3 hours, another agency is calling you and telling you, hey, we may have somebody or a vehicle that's connected to this. So then you start looking towards that individual's pattern of life, and you start looking at the finances first, specifically if they're a child of the two people that have been killed.
And they end up finding this vehicle in Chino, California, about 70 miles north of the scene. And it seems like it was in a park, very morbid, but the suspect, it appears, took his own life and did it with a car fire. The morbid part of it is it's not a body that would be very easy to visibly identify, probably. And you have to rely on DNA to be able to do it. How do you go about figuring out who that person is, and also doing it in a pretty timely manner to make sure that this is the person who you believe is responsible for what happened?
Yeah, that's so two things. One, if you have dental records, you can do that almost immediately with a forensic odontologist. And then second, of course, like you just mentioned, if you get any kind of blood pull, you can then start putting it through DNA. And there's a rapid DNA test called ANDI, ANDI. And what this machine does is within 4 hours, and typically the medical examiner's office have these machines, and it can kind of give you a baseline of whether or not this is a connection to the homicide scene.
It was rumored that the relationship between Dr. Cordes and his son, Keith, that it was an estranged relationship. And it's come to light that he allegedly drove the son from Kentucky, or traveled in some way from Kentucky, to get to Southern California to commit these murders. What stands out to you about that? I mean, because that just seems like an incredible commitment to travel all that way to carry this out.
Well, the first thing that jumps out at me is the intent. I mean, to your point, traveling, across the country, almost 3,000 miles to Southern California, and then showing up on a Sunday afternoon around noon, at your father's garage. That's showing that this individual is really, really hell-bent on, committing this particular crime. And so, again, at that point, you want to start looking into what was that motivation, what really pushed him to that point. And that, of course, will be some conversations and interviews with people around them.
Because then the other part of it, too, is what he did after. This wasn't someone who was making a run to Mexico with money or family heirlooms that he might have taken from the house. This is someone who ends up going to a park in a very horrific way, ends up taking his own life, according to police. Like, what does that tell you about maybe the state of mind of this person? And we don't know a motive, but how that could factor into the story being put together about what happened.
Yeah, I mean, it does make us stop and think, right? If once you've committed that crime, a lot of these offenders, they don't realize that after they have committed these types of crime, in their minds, they've planned it out, they've made to the destination, they've done the crime, but they didn't realize that there's a secondary problem here, and that is, oh my gosh, I just killed two people. And so then that guilt starts to set in, and sometimes the emotional aspect of, what just took place is overwhelming for him. And it sounds like in this case, that might be, the situation.
Knowing that, I mean, sadly, Dr. Cordes, his wife Vicki, they have passed away, and then the suspect is also dead. We still don't know a motive at this point. I'm sure, maybe family members do know a motive, maybe that there was a very public issue that they had, but it's no longer this whodunit and not a manhunt by any means. What type of work is done typically now after the fact to try and get a family those answers, but also knowing that the threat to the public just isn't there?
Well, the first thing you want to do is let the public know that, you want to get out there quickly with your PIO, your public information officer, and let the public know that, hey, this is a contained situation. And then, of course, you want to get into the weeds with probably the ex-wife and the young man, if he took his life, with his mother, if she's available, or siblings, and kind of get a pulse as to what was going on that may have given us some insight into what may have pushed him to this point.
It's the other part of this, in a lot of these stories related to homicides that I do like to talk about with people who work in law enforcement, because often in the true crime world, we focus on a little bit of the X's and O's of how you figure out how a case goes forward, but there's also a detective that's going to have to call family members. I know that Vicki Schiller, according to a friend, she had just become a grandma. And so no one was anticipating that this was going to happen. And you have to be the one to deliver that news and also answer some tough questions. How do you go about that with the family to make that phone call to explain what happened?
That's one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do working homicide. And I've done it many, many times. Typically, and in this particular situation, folks need to be aware, there are two medical examiners offices involved, one in San Bernardino, one in Ventura County. So you're going to have coroner investigators contacting, surviving family members. So they're going to get it twice, right? I mean, one for the son and one for the dad and his wife. And so typically what you would do is you go with the coroner investigator if they're available, and you just have to ring that doorbell. And I have found in my experience that you just do it as gently and as dignified as possible, but you just tell them straight up, I'm sorry to inform you, but your family member has passed away, after identifying yourself and then finding out that they're actually connected next to kin.
And you also look at what we know at this point. Dr. Cordes, very respected radiologist. His wife was a spin instructor who was beloved. A lot of people mourning her loss as well. And it does appear that, from the narrative that law enforcement put out, that this son travels from Kentucky to Southern California, takes the life of his dad and his stepmom. I'm not sure what his relationship was with Vicki, but legally his stepmom, and then goes and takes his own life. So it seems like there's kind of this beginning, middle, and end of what happened. But then at the same time, how do you know for certain that he acted alone and that there wasn't any other help or someone who else could have been involved with what happened?
Well, hopefully they have some type of weapon or something to that effect inside the charred vehicle. And if so, then from there they can do a ballistics and try to connect that gun to potentially any shell casings or anything like that left at the scene. And if that is, a definitive answer there, then you have at least one shooter. And then the second piece of that to your question would be to start looking to a digital footprint of some sort and see if there's any correlation to outside connections.
And then for, this being a son who lives in Kentucky, other side of the country, what type of resources do you get if you're a local department with talking to people who knew him in Kentucky, or talking to people who maybe knew where he bought the gun, if it's a legally purchased weapon? What type of investigation's done on that end to learn a little bit more, in this case about Keith Cordes, who police say is responsible?
Well, there's two routes that you can go. You can get to your federal assets involved, and because there's a weapon involved and because he came across the country, ATF can chase that weapon down for you. Right to where the moment it was purchased. And then if there's any interviews that need to be conducted, then you have the local agencies where he lived and or the FBI. They can throw some resources at it for you.
Just it's just incredibly sad. You think of, any homicide, as is incredibly sad and tragic, but to see two people who were spoken so highly of in this community, some sort of family violence leading to their deaths, just a sad case. Chris McDonough, homicide investigator. We always appreciate you coming on Law and Crime, helping us kind of understand the ins and outs of investigations like this. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.